with the COVID-19, it made me start thinking about getting our affairs in order. Of course, I'm in the arena of grief, and so my heart goes out to all those people who right now are in hospitals and having to die alone, not just from the virus, but from any other illness, because they're asking us to stay in place and they don't want us coming to the hospitals. But it's also for those people who are at home grieving and not being able to reach out. And then I started thinking, my gosh, what are the legal ramifications? If someone's not there to make decisions, life altering decisions for you, then what are you supposed to be doing? And so that's why I decided that I was going to invite Anthony Edmonds on for some news that we all can use during this time. He is an attorney, and he's going to be talking to us about some of the documentation that virtually all of us should have in place right now, because COVID-19 really, we're seeing it affect the young, the elderly, the single, the married, the immune compromised, the perfectly healthy. And it's a very scary situation. And I thought, you know what, I'm not doing this to put fear into you, but I'm doing this to start making us think about things that we probably all need to be thinking about. So, Anthony, thank you very much for joining me. Tell me, let's just start off with some of the documentation that we really should be having in place right now.
Well, thank you for having me, Sherry. First and foremost, specifically talking about medical power of attorney. And what that means specifically is someone having the ability to make decisions about you when you're incapacitated relative to medical care and end-of-life decisions. That's separate from the general power of attorney people may be familiar with regarding financial documents, property transfers, etc. Those documents can help, especially now in times when people are being isolated, if they're in intensive care and they can't have any visitors at all, and there's no one there to advocate for them. At the very least, they can have documentation to show what they want, how they want things to go, and someone that they can contact to make those decisions on their behalf.
So at what age should anyone have a medical power of attorney?
There is really no limit on when someone should have a medical power of attorney. Everybody should be able to have one. Everyone who's an adult should put somebody in place to make those decisions. It seems kind of morbid sometimes, but it's one of the things that you cannot put into place when it's time to put one in place, because then by then it's too late. But I look at it as a way of just giving comfort to yourself and to your loved ones. So any adult, because you can be, if you're a minor, then your parents have that authority. But if you're an adult, I mean, anybody can be in an accident at any time and be unable to make decisions for themselves. And that's why the medical power of attorneys are so important.
That's why I think that, what's going on right now with this virus made me think of that, is that there are a lot of people right now that are ill-equipped, that
Right.
don't have this, that there's no, so where does that decision-making power go to? If you are incapacitated, is it just left up to the medical community?
Generally speaking, it'll go to the next of kin. Usually if you're married, it'll go to your spouse, or if they do have family members that they can turn to, they'll ask them to make certain decisions. But they want to know, in the best case scenario, they want to know what you want. And if you've given all power to somebody else to make all those decisions, then at least they'll be comfortable knowing that. A lot of times in these medical power of attorney documents, you can put specific instances what you would like to have happen. Some people just say, I'm going to let my son or daughter make the decision. They can make any decision they want. In other cases, they say, well, if X happens, then I want Y to be the result. And I want my daughter to make that decision as I've written it down on these papers. So there's more clarity with that. It's a bit of a guessing game otherwise. And it puts a lot of pressure on family members to make decisions about what they think a loved one would want or wouldn't want when they're unable to communicate with them. So if you have these documents ahead of time, there doesn't have to be a guessing game. That doesn't mean they're easy decisions to make, but at the very least, you'll know in your heart, you're honoring the wishes of the person who's in trouble because they've laid them out for you ahead of time when they were healthy and of sound mind.
I would imagine too that it also alleviates differences of opinions within the family.
Absolutely. Um, Aside from just peace of mind, when emotions run high and family members can start turning on each other in a way that they don't necessarily mean to, but when they're dealing with a really high stress, very emotional situation, they can start to butt heads. And so if the person who is actually in trouble can't make the decisions in real time, they can still be the final arbiter of those decisions via their paperwork, and hopefully can curb some of those issues that will come up, because there will be enough issues as it is in those times, and those circumstances are particularly difficult. So we can eliminate some of that. But that's a good point. That's one way to keep those at bay, at least on certain issues.
So, my question is, if you do not have a medical power of attorney right now, and this, can you get one? Can you draw one up right now when we are in the midst of being isolated, socially isolated?
Right. So specifically right now, because this situation is unprecedented, there are not a lot of case law, which we normally look to, or statutory law, to consider a situation like this. So what my best advice would be, given, and everybody's circumstance is different, so they'd have to have a one-to-one conversation with their attorney, whether it's me or somebody else, about how to handle a particular situation. But generally speaking, I wouldn't let this situation stop you from putting power of attorney documents together. Generally, they require a notary and witnesses. And so what you could do is have video chats in which you have a notary and you're generally two witnesses present. They watch you sign documents that you can also put in front of them on a screen, sign them, and actually mail physical copies to them and say, yeah, I witnessed my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, whomever, signing these papers, and actually record the video. So if it comes to it down the road, you can show that you had all of these measures in place. You watched everybody sign these documents at the same time. You know the person's of sound mind. They were not under undue duress. And that way, if somebody wants to challenge it down the road, again, when emotions run high, things like that can happen. You'll have the documentation to show, actually, they were of sound mind. We did have all the measures in place. We did the best we could given the circumstance. We got it notarized, we got it witnessed, and we submitted copies to various authorities, whether it's your doctor or your attorney to hold for safekeeping, and other family members. So that's what I would direct people to do now, given these circumstances, because we have no idea what's going to happen when we're looking back on this, but nobody was completely prepared, especially normal citizens like we are. We're not completely prepared for these situations. So we try to stick to the parameters as much as we can, but also make common sense adjustments.
So the last time that my husband and I did a medical power of attorney was when we had our will done 23 years ago.
Okay.
How often, and so we have not revisited this, was what I'm saying.
Right.
How often should you revisit this? And I'm sure that it's time now for us to be doing this. At least we have one in place. But my question is, if you have one already in place, how often should you really be revisiting this to make sure this is still how you feel? These are still the people you want making the decisions.
Right. So there's no specific timeline. You can put one in place if you'd like to, like every 5 years, we're going to revisit, look over our stuff. There's no harm in that. But I would say the absolute time to do it, if you're not doing it on some consistent basis, is life-changing circumstances. And it doesn't have to be major. A child turning 18 is one example. Someone graduating from college, of course, divorce, getting remarried, situations in which loved ones have died that may change what your will looks like. Those are the kind of times where you absolutely call it a trigger point. When that happens, that's when you should absolutely revisit all of your end of life circumstances and your planning. And you may not want to change anything after reviewing it, and that's the case. That's totally fine. But then at least you'll know. And then if there is something glaring in there, well, that's not possible anymore, or that just doesn't make any sense anymore, then you can rearrange things at that time. So major life circumstance changes are the big ones. Even sometimes something like a new job is an example of that. But if you wanted to put a timetable on it, looking every 5 years wouldn't hurt either.
Okay. So what other advice do you have legally to offer people at this time? Because I think a lot of people feel like we have absolutely no control. And sometimes we let our fear get away And it just grows bigger and bigger and bigger. And this, like I said, this is not to scare people. This is to have people prepared, which actually, in the long run, I think, can add to peace of mind.
Absolutely. That's something I stress to people all the time. Just being prepared can result in peace of mind later on. As far as particulars, everybody's circumstance is different. So what I would stress to everyone is, contact your attorney to talk about these things. But generally speaking, you can continue, just ask the right questions. And if you don't even know what the right questions are, you can contact her and say, hey, with all of this going on, what should I do? Because everybody's circumstance will be different. But you can still, get wills together. You can still collect documents and put them in a place where people can find them, whether it's bank accounts, brokerage accounts, access to social media, so that whoever needs to do something with those, and that when the time comes, they can do it. There is one thing in particular about this circumstance that people should be aware of. It's not something that hospitals are doing, as a matter of course. They're doing it sparingly and when they have to make big decisions, and that is, some hospitals are giving a directive to not follow people's living wills, medical power of attorney, whatever the case may be. What that's going to mean legally is still up in the air, but the reason they're doing that is because when they're running out of options, hospitals that have all of their beds full and then they have more people coming in, they can't necessarily follow everybody's directives the way they'd like to. They absolutely want to, but sometimes it's just not feasible. We've heard a lot about people, potentially running out of respirators. Those are really, really hard decisions. They've had to make them in Italy. So the hospitals are putting in place, if we reach a certain threshold, then we need to not follow last directives in some cases because they have no other option. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. It doesn't mean the hospital's necessarily doing anything wrong. They're trying to do everything they can to keep everybody alive and healthy if possible. But they are having to make those tough decisions. So that is out there. So people should keep that in the back of their minds too. Be prepared, but just also be aware that that could happen and to know how to respond to it. And that if they're doing that, you got to make sure they've reached the thresholds that they put in place ahead of time, and also make sure that if they can follow them, that they do. And if not, then you just need to be on top of them. Say, okay, you reached this threshold. Here's what we're going to do. Here's why we're going to do it. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Even in this hectic environment, do not be afraid to ask.
Now that's some great advice. So if people have any additional questions, would you be willing to share your information so that they can ask those questions to you?
Absolutely. My office, we have attorneys licensed in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. The office number, and I'll give it now, it forwards to my cell phone and my other partner's cell phone. Mm-hmm. We're still answering questions at this time. So it's a 740-232-9608. It's a St. Clairsville number, but our office is in Wheeling, but we can still service everyone in the tri-state area. So again, 740-232-9608. If people have questions about this, they can still call us. We're still available. Even if you have to leave a brief message, we will get back to you. We're all working from home right now, but these are things that are particularly important. And so we can work out these details with you. We can do it over the phone, and we can try to answer every question as fully as possible.
And if you don't get it done now during this situation, it might be one of the first things you put on the top of your list, so that you make sure that you take care of this once it's all over.
Absolutely. And like you alluded to before, you can do all this stuff now and you're not locked into it forever. You can do a will now, and if life circumstances change, you can do another one. We can either add to the one you have, or we can write an entirely new one and void the old one, which is perfectly fine. It happens all the time. And like I said, there are a number of life circumstances that dictate that. I've helped people do that. The two biggest reasons that I face: someone passing away and children reaching age of majority. They grow up, they move out of the house, their needs change. So then your will just doesn't make any sense anymore. And one example I give of that is a lot of people will elect who they want to have as a guardian for their children if they don't survive. But once their children are adults, they don't need one anymore in most cases. That's just one example, but they all come up. Don't be afraid to put everything in place now for what's right for your life now, and be open and free to make changes in the future.
Okay, one last question before we go. If you're not in Ohio, West Virginia, or Pennsylvania, what kind of attorney should you be looking for to address these needs?
Reach out to someone who does estate planning.
Okay.
Usually elder law attorneys do it, but a lot of real estate attorneys also do estate planning because there's a lot of real estate issues involved in estate planning. Those are the people who generally deal with this. Now, it's bigger cities will have more specializations. Smaller areas have more general practice firms like ours is, who cover a lot because there's this population small, so we have to be really versatile. So those are, probably your top choices: elder law / estate planning attorneys and general practitioners. If you find them, speak with them. Usually they can either do the work for you or steer you in the right direction. But please don't try to go it alone,
Yeah.
I would say.
Great advice. Well, Anthony Edmond, thank you very much for spending time with us today. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and thank you for helping us to find ways to ease our fear during these uncharted waters.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Everybody be safe out there.